The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room had ever seen. It stretched so high that clouds could have formed beneath its crystalline dome. Lights from distant stars shone through the transparent ceiling, casting strange shadows across the faces of 47 alien species who had gathered to decide the fate of humanity. Stood alone on the human delegation's platform. She wore a simple gray suit, nothing fancy, nothing special. Around her, alien diplomats dressed in robes made of materials that seemed to glow and shimmer. Some wore armor that looked like it was grown rather than made. Others floated in special chambers filled with gases from their home worlds. She felt very small standing among them, but her heart beat steady and calm. High Chancellor of the Hegemony rose from his seat. He was tall, nearly 3 meters, with pale blue skin that seemed to catch the light in strange ways. 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern on his face, focused on with obvious contempt. They had ruled this part of the galaxy for 10,000 years. They did not think much of humans. The Council has reached a decision, announced. His voice was deep and rolled through the chamber like thunder. The universal translator in his ear converted his alien language into English, but it could not remove the arrogance in his tone. Humanity has broken the territorial expansion accords. Your species has built colonies in the drift without permission. You have refused to give us your weapons technology as we demanded. For these crimes, the Galactic Council declares war on the human race. The chamber erupted in noise. Aliens of all shapes and sizes reacted to the announcement. The insect-like creatures with hard shells and clicking mandibles rubbed their front legs together in approval. The massive reptiles with scales like armor and claws that could tear through metal growled with anticipation. The beings made of pure light pulsed brighter with excitement. Did not react. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back. 3 hours ago, she had received a message from Earth Command. The message had been short. Preparations complete. Await Council decision. Proceed as planned. She had been waiting for this moment her entire career. Her father had waited for it too, and his mother before him. 300 years of waiting was about to end. Looked down at her with something like pity in his 4 eyes. Do you have anything to say, Ambassador? Perhaps you wish to beg for mercy. The Council might show kindness if you surrender now. Allowed herself to smile. It was a small smile, barely visible, but several aliens near her platform noticed it and shifted uncomfortably. Actually, Chancellor, I do have something to say. Her voice was calm and clear. It carried across the chamber without any effort. I have a message from Earth. She paused, letting the silence build. The aliens waited, expecting tears or desperate pleas or angry threats. What they got was something else entirely. It's finally time. Confusion spread through the chamber. 4 eyes narrowed. Time for what? Tapped a button on her wrist communicator. Earth Command, this is Ambassador. The Council has made their declaration. Authorization code, Prometheus Rising. A voice responded through her earpiece, loud enough for the nearby aliens to hear. It was Admiral Samuel Drake, commander of Earth's Defense Forces. Acknowledged, Ambassador. Defensive Protocol 7 is now active. The fleet is moving into position. Godspeed. The aliens closest to exchanged worried glances. Fleet? What fleet? Human space was protected by maybe 200 ships, barely enough to patrol their own borders. The Council's combined military numbered over 15,000 vessels. Began to walk slowly around her platform. Every eye in the chamber followed her. Let me tell you a story, Chancellor. 300 years ago, when humanity first discovered faster-than-light travel, we were so excited. We thought we would find friends among the stars, allies, fellow explorers who shared our wonder at the universe. She stopped and looked directly at. Instead, we found you. The word hung in the air like an accusation. We found a galaxy ruled by fear and force. We learned about a peaceful species that was wiped out because they refused to give up there. We learned about the enslaved by the millions because they had resources you wanted. We learned about a dozen other civilizations that were destroyed or conquered simply because they were weaker than their neighbors. Resumed her slow walk around the platform. Our leaders made a choice. They decided that humanity would not share the fate of those species, but they also knew that we were too weak to fight the Council. We had just discovered space travel. You had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. A direct confrontation would have meant our extinction. She smiled again, and this time more aliens noticed the strange confidence in her expression. So we pretended to be weak. We showed you exactly what you expected to see. Primitive ships, basic technology, a small defensive force that could barely protect our own worlds. We let you believe that humanity was no threat to anyone. High Chancellor's blue skin was beginning to pale. What are you saying? I'm saying that for 300 years, humanity has been preparing, building, developing technologies that you cannot imagine, creating a fleet that dwarfs anything you have ever seen, and hiding it all from your spies and your censors and your scouts. She returned to the center of her platform and faced the Council directly. Your intelligence reports showed you a species of primitive newcomers, harmless, weak, easy to control. Smile widened. Those reports showed you exactly what we wanted you to see, the real humanity, the civilization we've been building in secret. You have no idea what we're capable of. Rose from his seat, his 4 eyes wide with a mixture of anger and growing fear. You're bluffing. This is a desperate trick. Humanity cannot possibly have. Cannot possibly have what? Interrupted. A fleet of 12,000 capital ships, weapons that can punch through your best shields like they're made of paper, defensive systems that your entire military cannot overcome. She let those numbers sink in. 12,000 ships. The Council had assumed humanity had 200. So yes, Chancellor, declare your war, send your fleets, attack our worlds. Gathered her belongings and began walking toward the chamber exit. Just know that humanity has been waiting for this moment since the day we first realized we weren't alone in the universe. She paused at the doorway and looked back at the assembled delegates. And we've been preparing ever since. The chamber exploded into chaos as walked out. Behind her, the most powerful species in the galaxy were beginning to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. They had looked at humanity and seen prey. They had declared war on what they thought was a weak and primitive species. They had no idea what was coming. Outside the chamber allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she forced them to be still. The first move had been made. Now came the hard part. She activated her communicator. Admiral Drake, the Council is in chaos. How long until our fleet is in position? 6 hours, Drake's voice responded. Then we show them what humanity can really do. Nodded and walked toward the shuttle that would take her back to Earth. 300 years of hiding was over. The war had begun. And humanity was ready. Deep beneath the red surface of Mars, in a facility that did not appear on any map, Admiral Samuel Drake stood in the largest war room ever built by human hands. The chamber stretched for nearly a kilometer, carved into the rock by machines that worked in secret for over a century. Thousands of officers and technicians sat at their stations, monitoring information from every corner of human space. Drake was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short, and a face that showed the marks of decades spent preparing for this moment. His father had served in this same facility. So had his grandfather. 3 generations of the Drake family had dedicated their lives to a war that most people on Earth did not even know was coming. Now that war had arrived. "Status report," Drake commanded. His voice was calm, the voice of a man who had trained his entire life for exactly this situation. Commander Lisa Morgan stepped forward. She was younger than Drake, in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been Drake's second in command for 15 years, and there was no one he trusted more. All defensive platforms are online, Admiral. The orbital networks around Earth, Mars, and every colony world are at full power. Our stealth fleet has moved into position along the routes we expect the Council to use for their invasion. Drake nodded, and the shipyards. Luna Base reports that the last group of Titan-class battleships will be ready for combat within 48 hours. That brings our total fleet to 12,000 capital ships and 30,000 support vessels. The numbers were staggering. For 3 centuries, humanity had shown the galaxy a defensive force of just 200 ships. Old ships, slow ships, ships with weapons that could barely scratch the paint on a cruiser. It was all a lie. The real human fleet had been built in secret facilities scattered throughout the solar system and hidden in asteroid belts and empty regions of space. The ships were faster, stronger, and more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human scientists, working without the restrictions that other species placed on research, had developed technologies that should not have been possible for a civilization as young as humanity. On the holographic display that dominated the war room, red dots began appearing at the edge of human space. The Council's fleet was gathering. Early reports suggested roughly 15,000 vessels from 7 different species, with the providing the largest portion. "They're bringing everything they have," Drake observed. He studied the formation of the enemy fleet with the eye of a man who had spent decades preparing for this exact scenario. "They expect to overwhelm us with numbers, crush our defenses in a single massive attack." "The standard Council strategy," Morgan agreed. "It's worked against every other species they've faced." "It won't work against us." Drake turned to face the assembled command staff, men and women who had spent their careers in the shadows, preparing for a conflict that their own families did not know about. "Ladies, and this is the moment we've been waiting for. Our ancestors made a choice 300 years ago. They decided that humanity would survive no matter the cost. Every sacrifice, every secret, every year spent hiding our true strength has led to this point." He gestured toward the massive display, where blue dots were now appearing throughout human space. Each dot represented a ship emerging from its hiding place, secret bases in asteroid fields, shipyards buried beneath the surfaces of moons, fleets that had waited in the darkness between stars for decades. "Today, we stop hiding. Today, we show the galaxy what we're capable of. And today, we begin something that should have happened a long time ago: the liberation of every species that has suffered under the Council's rule." The display updated with new tactical information. The Council fleet had started moving toward human space, arranged in the same attack formation they had used against a dozen other civilizations. It was a formation designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers, to crush any resistance through pure force. It had never failed before. "They're following their usual approach," Commander Morgan noted. "A straight attack with everything they have. No subtlety, no strategy, just overwhelming power." "Because that's all they've ever needed," Drake replied. "They've never faced an enemy that could match them. They've grown lazy and overconfident." He allowed himself a small smile. "Begin Operation Lighthouse." Throughout human space, ships that had been dark and silent for years suddenly came to life. Power systems activated, weapons charged, engines that had never been tested in combat roared into action. And the galaxy saw, for the first time, what humanity had really been building. The defensive platforms were the first surprise. Hundreds of stations that the Council had dismissed as mining facilities or communication relays revealed their true purpose. Hidden weapons emerged from concealed ports. Energy shields, far more powerful than anything the galaxy had seen before, flickered to life. The Council's forward scout ships were the first to encounter these defenses. They had expected to brush aside whatever token resistance the humans could offer. Instead, they ran into a wall of concentrated energy fire that their sensors could barely comprehend. Cruisers, ships that had terrorized dozens of species, exploded after just a few hits. Their shields, which had proven impenetrable against every other civilization, failed almost immediately under the assault of human weapons. In less than 10 minutes, 300 council ships were reduced to clouds of debris and radiation. On Station Nexus Prime, where the Galactic Council watched the battle unfold, High Chancellor stared at the reports with growing horror. His blue skin had gone almost white. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly as he tried to process what he was seeing. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Their weapons technology, their defensive systems. How can they possibly have this?" Admiral Vex of the fleet sent an urgent message from his command ship. The commander's voice clicked and buzzed with what might have been panic. "Chancellor, we are detecting massive energy readings throughout human space. Their fleet is much larger than we believed, much larger than anything we have ever encountered." The holographic display showed blue dots continuing to appear, more and more ships emerging from hidden positions. 12,000 capital ships, 30,000 support vessels, a fleet that dwarfed anything the Council had ever assembled. And the ships moved together with perfect coordination, like a single organism made of steel and fire. Unlike the Council forces, which were divided by species and competing commanders, the human fleet operated as one unified force. Every ship knew exactly where every other ship was. Every weapon fired with purpose and precision. "We need to pull back," Admiral Vex urged. "Regroup and develop a new strategy. We have badly underestimated the humans." But before could respond, a new signal cut through every communication channel in the Council fleet. A human face appeared on every screen, every display, every holographic projector. Admiral Samuel Drake looked out at the assembled alien commanders with eyes that showed no fear. "This is Admiral Samuel Drake of Earth Command. Your initial attack has failed. Your forward forces have been destroyed. You now have a choice to make. Withdraw your fleets and return to negotiate peace, or continue this war and face the full consequences of your actions." Drake's expression hardened. His voice became cold. "I should warn you. Humanity does not fight wars halfway. If you choose to continue, we will not stop until the threat to our people is permanently removed. You have 6 hours to decide." The transmission ended. Silence fell across the Council fleet as the commanders tried to understand what had just happened. They had come to crush a primitive species. They had expected an easy victory against a civilization that had only discovered space travel 3 centuries ago. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. High Chancellor stood alone in his command chamber, staring at the display that showed the destruction of his forward fleet. 300 ships, gone in minutes, and the human fleet was still growing, still emerging from hiding places scattered across their territory. He had 6 hours to make a decision that would determine the fate of his species, and perhaps the entire galaxy. 6 hours to decide whether pride was worth extinction. 6 hours passed. The Council did not withdraw. High Chancellor had spent those hours in argument with his military advisors and the leaders of the allied species. Some wanted to retreat and reconsider. They calculated that their chances of victory had dropped significantly. The smaller species in the alliance whispered about making separate peace deals with the humans, but refused to back down. The hegemony had ruled this region of the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had crushed every challenger, conquered every rival, destroyed every species that dared to stand against them. The idea of retreating from a species that had existed for barely a blink in galactic terms was unthinkable. Pride, in the end, made the decision for him. The full Council fleet, 15,000 ships from 7 species, began its advance toward human space. Admiral Drake received the news without surprise. He had known from the beginning that the Council would not accept defeat easily. Their entire civilization was built on the belief that strength made right, that the powerful deserved to rule the weak. They could not imagine a universe where they were not the strongest. They were always going to choose war, Drake said quietly to Commander Morgan. Their society doesn't know how to do anything else. Then we'll have to teach them a different way, Morgan replied. The main battle took place in the Arcturus system, a star system that sat between Council space and the human colonies. Drake had chosen this location carefully. It was far enough from civilian populations that innocent people would not be caught in the crossfire, but it was close enough to human supply lines that his fleet would have every advantage. The Council fleet arrived in a massive wave. Thousands of ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in nearly perfect formation. It was an impressive display, the result of centuries of experience in interstellar warfare. They had perfected this kind of assault over thousands of years. But humanity had been preparing even longer. All ships, this is Admiral Drake. His voice was broadcast to every vessel in the human fleet. Execute Battle Plan Omega. Show them what 300 years of preparation looks like. The human fleet moved as one. Unlike the Council forces, which were divided into separate groups based on species and often argued about who should lead, every human ship was part of a single unified command. Quantum-linked computers allowed instant communication across the entire fleet. When one ship moved, every other ship knew exactly where it was and what it was doing. The Council had never faced anything like it. Captain Cole commanded the battleship Resilience, one of the new Titan-class vessels that had been the final product of centuries of secret development. The ship was massive, nearly 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. But it moved with a speed and grace that seemed impossible for something so large. From his bridge, Cole watched his ship's weapons tear through a dreadnought. The enemy vessel had been the pride of their fleet, a ship that had destroyed entire civilizations. It lasted less than 30 seconds against the Resilience's main guns. Their shields are failing faster than we expected, reported Lieutenant Amy, his weapons officer. It's like they don't understand how our beam technology works. Cole nodded. They don't. That's the problem with being on top for too long. You stop innovating. You stop improving. Why bother developing new technology when you can just take whatever you want from weaker species? Across the battlefield, the same scene repeated thousands of times. Human ships, faster and more maneuverable than anything the Council possessed, danced through the enemy formation. Their weapons found weaknesses in alien defenses that should not have existed. Their shields absorbed punishment that would have destroyed any Council vessel. They were the first to break. Their commanders, beings who thought in terms of pure logic and calculation, recognized that continued fighting meant total destruction. There was no logic in dying for a lost cause. Their fleet in good order, ignoring the furious commands from High Chancellor to hold their position. The followed shortly after. They were warriors, proud and fierce, but they were not stupid. Their honor codes valued courage, but they also valued knowing when a battle was lost. There was no glory in extinction. One by one, the Council's allied species began to retreat. Their fleets peeled away from the main formation, jumping to faster-than-light speed and fleeing toward their home territories. Only the remained. High Chancellor had joined his fleet personally, commanding from the bridge of his massive flagship. He had never lost a battle in his long life. He could not accept that he was losing this one. All ships maintain formation, he commanded. His voice was steady despite the chaos around him. We will break through their lines. We will destroy their command structure. Cut off the head and the body will fall. The flagship pushed forward through the human formation. It was a desperate move, a suicide charge aimed at the carrier group where Admiral Drake commanded the battle. Believed that human society was like every other species he had conquered. Destroy the leader and the rest would fall apart. He did not understand humans at all. "Admiral," Commander Morgan reported from her station, "the flagship is trying to break through to our position. They're making a direct attack on the carrier group." Drake studied the tactical display. The enemy flagship was huge, nearly 3 kilometers long, and it was cutting a path through his fleet with desperate ferocity. Several smaller human ships had already been destroyed trying to stop it. "Should we pull back?" Morgan asked. "Reinforce our position?" "No," Drake's voice was calm. "Let them come, it's time to end this." The flagship pushed deeper into the human formation. Its weapons blazed in all directions, destroying everything in its path. Stood on his bridge, watching the human carrier group grow larger in his. Victory was close. He could feel it. Then the trap closed. Human battleships that had seemed to be fleeing suddenly reversed course. Ships that had been hiding behind debris fields emerged into the open. In seconds, the flagship was surrounded by dozens of vessels, all pouring fire into its shields. The shields held for almost a minute, then they flickered, then they failed. Explosions ripped through the flagship's hull. Critical systems went offline. The great ship, pride of the military, began to break apart under the concentrated assault. Admiral Drake opened a communication channel. "High Chancellor, your fleet is beaten. Your allies have abandoned you. Your flagship is dying around you. I'm offering you one final chance to surrender with honor." His face appeared on the screen. His pale blue skin was darker now, flushed with rage and disbelief. His 4 eyes were wide with emotions that his species rarely showed: anger, fear, despair. "Surrender," he spat. "To you, to a species that has existed for barely a heartbeat. We are the hegemony. We have ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. We do not surrender to primitives." "Then you die as fools," Drake replied without emotion. "But you don't have to take your people with you. Think of your crews. Think of your families back home. Is your pride worth all their lives?" For a long moment was silent. Around him, his flagship groaned and shuddered as more systems failed. Warning alarms screamed from every console. His officers looked at him with desperate hope, praying that their leader would choose life over death. Finally, something in his expression changed. The rage faded. The defiance crumbled. He suddenly looked very old, very tired, and very beaten. "I accept your terms," he whispered. The words seemed to cause him physical pain. "The hegemony surrenders." Across the battlefield, weapons fell silent. The largest battle in galactic history was over. The Council had begun the day with 15,000 ships. They ended it with less than 7,000, and most of those belonged to species that had fled early. They had lost over 2/3 of their fleet. Humanity had lost 217 ships. As rescue operations began and prisoners were gathered, Commander Morgan stood beside Admiral Drake on the bridge of his carrier. "We won," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost disbelieving. "This battle," Drake corrected, "but our real work is just beginning. We didn't fight this war to protect ourselves. We fought it to change everything." He looked out at the debris field that had once been the Council's mighty fleet. "Now comes the hard part, building something better." The peace negotiations took place on a space station in an empty star system, far from any world that might have feelings about who owned it. The station had been built quickly, assembled in just 3 weeks by human construction ships that worked without rest. It was plain and functional, without any decoration or beauty. This was not a place for celebration. It was a place for making decisions that would shape the future of the galaxy. Ambassador led the human delegation. Admiral Drake stood beside her as military advisor, his presence a reminder of what humanity could do if the negotiations failed. They faced a chamber full of alien beings who had, just weeks ago, looked at humans as primitive creatures to be conquered and controlled. Now those same aliens looked at with fear in their eyes. Some also showed respect. A few, from species that had suffered under Council rule, showed something that might have been hope. stood at the central podium and waited for the chamber to fall silent. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. Let me begin by making something very clear. Humanity did not fight this war for conquest. We have no interest in becoming the new rulers of this galaxy. We have no desire to do to others what the Council did to so many species over the past 10,000 years. She paused to let those words sink in. We fought because we had no choice, because the Council declared war on us, because we knew that if we did not defend ourselves, we would be destroyed or enslaved like so many others before us. She activated a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy. Red areas marked the territory controlled by the old Council, blue marked human space, and scattered throughout the map were dozens of small yellow points. These yellow markers represent species that were destroyed, enslaved, or conquered by the Council over the wiped out because they refused to abandon the millions of them forced into slavery because they had minerals the Council wanted. The Vex, dozens of civilizations whose only crime was being weaker than their neighbors, looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from species both powerful and weak. Humanity refuses to live in a galaxy where this is acceptable, where the strong simply take what they want from the weak, where entire species can be exterminated and no one does anything about it. She took a deep breath before continuing. Our terms for peace are as follows. First, the Galactic Council in its current form is dissolved immediately. Second, all enslaved populations are released and their home worlds returned to them. Third, a new governing body will be created based on principles of equality and cooperation. Every species will have an equal voice, regardless of how powerful their military is. Murmurs swept through the chamber. What humanity was proposing was revolutionary. It would completely change how galactic civilization worked. High Chancellor, attending the negotiations as a prisoner under guard, rose to speak. He had aged visibly since his defeat. His blue skin was pale and his 4 eyes looked tired. You speak of equality, Ambassador, but your actions tell a different story. You have shown that humanity has military power beyond anything else in this galaxy. How can there be equality when one species can destroy all others whenever it wishes? Nodded, it was a fair question, and she had prepared for it. You raise an important point, Chancellor, which brings me to our final term. She looked at Admiral Drake, who stepped forward to address the assembly. Humanity will not use our military power to control others, Drake announced. Instead, we will share our technology, our defensive systems, our medical knowledge, our methods for producing clean energy. Everything we have developed over the past 3 centuries will be available to any species that joins the new Galactic Union. Shocked silence filled the chamber. This was something that had never happened in galactic history. Technology was power. Every species guarded their secrets carefully. The idea of giving away such advantages was unthinkable. Admiral Vex of the spoke up, his mandibles clicking with confusion. Why would you do this? What do you gain from giving away your greatest advantages? Smiled. We gain a galaxy where we don't have to hide anymore, where our children can explore the stars without fear, where progress benefits everyone instead of being hoarded by the powerful few. She spread her hands wide. Humanity didn't develop our technology because we wanted to rule. We developed it because we wanted to survive. Now that our survival is secure, we want something more. We want a galaxy that is worth living in. We want neighbors who are partners, not threats. We want to build something better than what came before. The negotiations continued for weeks. There were arguments, compromises, and moments when everything seemed about to collapse. Old hatreds ran deep. Some species had been enemies for thousands of years and could not easily forget their history. But slowly, painfully, a new order began to take shape. The Galactic Union was established with its capital on a newly built station called Unity. Every member species received one vote in the General Assembly, whether they had a fleet of 10,000 ships or no ships at all. A shared peacekeeping force, equipped with human technology and crewed by personnel from all species, would protect member worlds and prevent aggression. The formerly oppressed species received priority assistance. Human ships carried supplies and equipment to the survivors of the genocide, helping them rebuild on their ancestral worlds. They were freed from their labor camps and given everything they needed to restart their civilization. Species that had been pushed to the edge of extinction finally had a chance to recover. Not everyone was happy with the new arrangement. Many refused to accept their reduced status and plotted rebellion in secret. Some species resented human power even as they benefited from human generosity. Old prejudices and old fears did not disappear overnight. But things were getting better. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the direction of change was positive rather than negative. Species were cooperating instead of competing. Knowledge was being shared instead of hoarded. The strong were helping the weak instead of exploiting them. Ambassador spent most of her time traveling between worlds, helping to resolve disputes and build connections. She visited and saw children playing in rebuilt cities. She attended the first free elections in history. She helped negotiate trade agreements that benefited all parties instead of just the powerful ones. It was exhausting work, but it was good work, meaningful work, the kind of work that her ancestors had dreamed of when they first decided to hide humanity's true strength. One evening, after a particularly difficult round of negotiations, sat alone in her quarters on Unity Station. She looked out the window at the ships passing by, vessels from dozens of species traveling peacefully on their own business. Her communicator chimed. Admiral Drake's face appeared on the screen. "Long day?" he asked. Laughed tiredly. "They're all long days now, but it's getting easier. They finally agreed to joint patrols with the 2 years ago, those two species would have gone to war over such a proposal." Drake nodded, progress slow but real. "Is it enough?" asked. The question had been bothering her for weeks. Are we actually changing things, or are we just putting a new face on the same old problems? Drake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My grandfather used to tell me stories about what Earth was like before humans learned to cooperate. Tribes fighting over territory, nations going to war over resources. It took us thousands of years to figure out how to live together peacefully." "And you think the galaxy can learn the same lesson?" "I think we have to try," Drake replied. "The alternative is going back to the way things were, conquest and slavery and extinction. That's not a future worth having." Nodded slowly. He was right. The path forward was difficult and uncertain, but it was better than going backward. "Get some rest, Admiral," she said. "Tomorrow we start negotiations with the Outer Rim species. They've been watching from the sidelines, waiting to see how things develop." "More work," Drake said with a slight smile. "Always more work," agreed. "But at least now we're working towards something worth building." She ended the call and looked back out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human children were growing up in a galaxy that was safer than it had been a year ago. That was worth something. That was worth everything. The new order was fragile and imperfect, but it was real, and it was growing stronger every day. 1 year had passed since the end of the war. Unity Station had grown from a simple meeting place into a thriving center of galactic civilization. Ships from every corner of known space docked at its ports. Delegates from species that had been enemies for now worked together in its halls. Markets sold goods from 100 different worlds, and restaurants served food that would have seemed like magic just a few years ago. Ambassador stood on the main observation deck, watching the endless flow of traffic through the transparent walls. Beside her was a young named, one of a new generation that had grown up in the shadow of their people's defeat and was trying to build something different. Was tall like all his kind, with the same pale blue skin and 4 eyes that had once made his species terrifying to smaller civilizations. But there was something different about him, something softer. He looked at the passing ships not with the arrogance of a conqueror, but with the wonder of someone seeing possibilities he had never imagined. "I never thought I would see this," admitted. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "And humans working side by side. My people were taught from birth that we were superior to everyone else, that the galaxy existed for us to rule. That weakness deserved to be conquered." Nodded. "And humans were taught to fear anything different from ourselves, to assume the worst about anyone we didn't understand. We both had a lot of learning to do." "Do you think it will last?" asked. He gestured at the busy station around them, at the ships carrying goods and passengers between worlds that had never traded before. "This peace, this union, will it survive?" Considered the question carefully. It was something she had asked herself many times over the past year. Through the observation windows, she could see a human patrol vessel escorting a convoy of trading ships. They had been slaves just 2 years ago. Now they were rebuilding their civilization with help from the species that had helped free them. Their ancient knowledge, nearly lost during centuries of oppression, was being recovered and preserved. "Nothing lasts forever," said finally. "Empires rise and fall. Alliances form and break apart. That's just how the universe works." His face fell slightly at her words. "But that's not really the point," continued. She turned to face the young directly. "The point is that we've proven something important. We've shown that the galaxy doesn't have to work the way it always has, that cooperation is possible, that different species can find common ground if they're willing to try." She looked back out at the stars. "The Union might fail someday. New threats might appear that we can't handle. Future generations might forget the lessons we've learned and make the same mistakes all over again. But they'll also have something that no one had before. They'll have proof that another way is possible, a model to follow, a foundation to build on." Was silent for a moment, processing her words. Then he said, "My grandmother was on the council when they declared war on humanity. She was one of those who voted for the attack. She told me that humans seemed so small, so primitive, so easy to crush. She couldn't understand how you could have been hiding such power." Smiled slightly. "We weren't hiding power. We were building hope. Every ship we made, every weapon we developed, every technology we discovered was in service of a dream. The dream that someday we could create a galaxy where no species had to live in fear, where being weak didn't mean being destroyed." She paused, remembering her own moment in the council chamber, when she had delivered humanity's message to the assembled delegates. The confusion on their faces, the dawning fear as they realized their mistake. "When I said it's finally time, I wasn't talking about war," explained. "I was talking about this." She gestured at the bustling station around them, at the ships and the people and the activity that represented something new in the galaxy. This was always the goal. The war was just what we had to go through to get here. Across the station, the General Assembly was meeting to discuss how to welcome 3 newly discovered species from a distant part of the galaxy. Human delegates sat alongside, and representatives from a dozen other civilizations. They argued and debated and sometimes raised their voices, but they were working together. They were solving problems through words instead of weapons. On Earth, children grew up learning about the galaxy not as a place of monsters and danger, but as a frontier full of wonders waiting to be explored. They studied the languages and cultures of alien species in school. They dreamed of traveling to distant worlds and meeting beings that their grandparents had never imagined. And in quiet places throughout human space, in memorial gardens and simple monuments, the names of those who had made this future possible were remembered. Scientists who had worked in secret their entire lives, developing technologies that they knew they might never see used. Soldiers who had trained for a war that might never come. Leaders who had made impossible choices, sacrificing their own peace of mind to prepare for a future they could only hope for. Admiral Samuel Drake had retired shortly after the war ended. He had given decades of his life to preparing for a conflict that lasted only weeks. Now he lived on a small colony world at the edge of human space, in a simple house overlooking mountains that no human had ever climbed before. In his final public speech, given at the dedication of the first memorial to those who had served in the Hidden Fleet, Drake had offered words that became humanity's unofficial motto in the new era. "We prepared for war because we had to," he had said, "but we always hoped for peace. We built weapons, but we dreamed of building something else, something better, and in the end, hope was our greatest weapon. Hope that we could change things. Hope that the galaxy could be different. Hope that our children would live in a universe where they didn't have to hide." Thought of those words often. She thought of them when negotiations grew difficult and old hatreds threatened to tear the Union apart. She thought of them when she was tired and wondered if all their work was making any real difference. And she thought of them now, standing beside a young who represented everything the Union was trying to achieve. A member of a species that had been humanity's enemy, who was now trying to build a different kind of future. "My grandmother asked me something before she died," said quietly. "She wanted to know if I was ashamed of being, if I wished I had been born into a different species." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that I was proud to be, that our history was what it was and we couldn't change it, but that we could choose what we do with our future." Looked at with something like hope in his 4 eyes. "I told her that I wanted to be part of building something better, something that would make up for what we had done wrong." Nodded. "That's all any of us can do, learn from the past and try to do better in the future." The observation deck was getting crowded now. Beings from a dozen different species gathered to watch the sunset over the station's artificial horizon. Some had been enemies just a year ago. Some still didn't entirely trust each other. But they were here together, sharing a moment of peace in a galaxy that had known too little of it. Looked at them all and felt something she had rarely allowed herself to feel during the long years of preparation and war. She felt hope. Not hope for survival, which had driven humanity for 3 centuries, but hope for something more. Hope for a future that was genuinely better than the past. The galaxy had changed. It would continue to change in ways that no one could predict. There would be setbacks and failures and moments when it seemed like the whole experiment might collapse. That was inevitable. Change was never easy or smooth. But humanity had left its mark, not as conquerors or tyrants, but as builders, as dreamers, as beings who looked at a galaxy ruled by fear and said, "We can do better than this." And that, decided as she watched the sunset paint the stars in colors no human had names for, was a legacy worth fighting for. The end had become a beginning, and the beginning was just getting started.